work outside and much of the farm equipment out here, and I'm a poor one to narrate this because all I can tell you is they're tractors. I don't know the years of them. And the old plows, that does down at the end look like you'd sit there on whatever that is and have it pull. I don't know what these machineries are.
That's a cultivator.
A cultivator?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, see?
You ride that thing, and if you get too close to the cotton, you kind of wiggle it a little and move it away from it. Horses are pulling it.
That's the way to do it. You just tell about it, Paul. Is that,
That's a mowing machine there. And that's a two-row planter there, corn and so forth.
Almost nothing. Well, when we were small in our childhood, didn't the summers seem longer to you? And weren't they hotter? Well, we knew they were hotter because we didn't have any fans, or we didn't have any cooling systems. The only thing we had was an old fan to fan our faces or an old newspaper. So we didn't have the luxuries we have today, but oh, the summer seemed so long. If we didn't have the old irrigation ditches to jump into, I don't know what in the world we would have done. I remember when I lived on Harn Lane, and I jumped into the irrigation ditch, I had to go clear down to Broadway and then run back on the ditch bank and jump in the water again because we couldn't swim upstream. And some of the kids tried to tell me they were dead mules in the canals up above the ditches, and we were swimming in dirty water, but it didn't make any difference to me. All I knew is that the water looked good to me, and I sure had fun jumping into the old ditches. Well, the summers seemed longer to me, and the winters seemed colder and longer in the wintertime. Remember when we used to wake up in the morning and the ground would be covered and the grass would be covered with frost until it actually looked like snow. It was so white. And the ice on the cow trough and the horse troughs would actually be 1/4 of an inch thick. And I remember Grandfather had to break the ice so they could drink the water. So I'm sure it used to be colder than in those days than it is now. And rain, my goodness, it used to rain a week at a time, night and day. And I don't think it does that anymore. We get storms that last an hour or something, and that's about it. But in those days, it was really a storm that lasted for a week. And I remember Grandfather taking me to school in the old horse with the old horse and buggy, and he had to carry me into the Franklin building and set me up there by the door, and he had to wear his gum boots because the mud and slosh was so bad that he couldn't just wear his shoes. He had to put on those gum boots and carry me in, and other kids' parents were taking them to school too. And the old streets in Mesa, I remember when the mud was so thick that it was just like jelly, and it would come up as high as the hubs on the buggies and the wagons, and the planks had to be put across the street, big heavy planks on bricks, so we could cross over the mud onto the other side. And if you saw someone on the other side that was about to cross over to your side, you had to wait until they got over. Only one person at a time could cross those old streets. So those old days are gone. But oh, I guess we have to just go with the times. But we still have our memories. I remember at school that we had to line up, you know, to march in. We couldn't just go to our classes. We had to march in by music, and Afton Peterson used to play that old march, and the downbeat was so strong that we could go left, right, and I think you remember that little tune. I liked it so well that I had to learn it from Afton, and I went home and learned it by ear. there's only a few measures of that old tune, and the only way I could change it is to go from one octave to another octave and make each octave change, and that was the only change. I think you remember of marching into that same old tune. I don't know whether I played it or whether Afton played it. I think you thought I did, but you must have been in Sunday school because I played it for Sunday school and I played it for primary. So I'll play that old tune for you, and if I make a lot of bloopers, now you just don't pay any attention to it.
Close your phone again.
Paul, do you remember Sarah Hastings? Poor little Sarah. She was my age, and we lined up together, and I tried to line up with her because she was a little different, and the kids didn't treat her as good as they should. And I'll never forget the day we marched in and she lost her petticoat. Now the rest of us wore dresses that were, down to her knees, or maybe an inch or two below her knees, but Sarah's mother put clothes on her, and she wore clothes clear down to her ankles. So as we were marching in, I guess the string from that old petticoat the knot must have come undone, and down her petticoat went around her shoes. And the boys began to holler and laugh, and the girls were laughing too. And she picked up her petticoat and wadded it up and put it under her arm and went on with her march. But I sure felt sorry for poor Sarah. And of course she was marching to that tune that I just played, and wasn't that sad that she had to break the rhythm for just a minute to pick up her skirt. Well, going home from school was a lot of fun, and there's one thing that I used to like to do. I shouldn't have, because Grandma was worried when I didn't get home from school on time, but I just loved to go by your place and play with Noni and Lottie under that old pomegranate hedge. Do you remember that old hedge, loaded with pomegranates? Well, it was just thick enough that we liked to crawl underneath there, and we played paper dolls, or we played dolls, and I almost forgot that the sun was getting lower and lower, but I'd give anything if we had a pomegranate hedge like that old hedge that you had. And Aunt Annie was so good to me. You had the sweetest mother. She would put her arm around me and make me feel so welcome, and I knew I was just a little freckle-faced, tow-headed girl, and I wasn't very pretty, but Aunt Annie just made me feel like that I really, really amounted to something. I just loved your mother. Uncle John, your father, I just didn't know him too well. I was a little bit afraid of him. Not that he ever said anything to make me afraid, but I think I was a little afraid of Uncle John. But I sure loved your mother. Well, we didn't have a pomegranate hedge, and I would have loved to have had one. But I'll tell you something that we had that you didn't have. You had it all right. But it wasn't like mine, because I had one that was different than anyone's in the whole country, and that's the old outhouse. Now, most of those old outhouses, we sure hated to go out there. But by golly, the one I had, I loved to go out there because it was different than most of them. As privies go, the privy of my childhood looked the same as the run-of-the-mill privies at the turn of the century. It was a two-holer made of rough 1x12 lumber. The slanted roof was shingled to withstand any type of weather. You know how the old pioneers made things. They made things to last until Gabriel blew his horn, no matter what they made. It had a sturdy door and a strong floor. Strong hinges was on that old door, and it swung easily, but you know, I never did close it. When I went out there, I liked the wide open spaces. Inside of that old privy, they didn't have any furnishings except that old wooden barrel that had the Sears Roebuck catalog in it and old numbers of the Farmer's Almanac. But golly, we went through that old book over and over and over again. The thing about that old privy was that it was different than most privies because Grandfather put it over an irrigation ditch. Well, I'll tell you about it. The route to the privy was a well-beaten path. First, you left the house by the back door, you crossed the porch, you descended 3 steps to the ground, and started the tour. Passing the black broiler tub, you remember that old broiler tub? We had to punch and pull it up and down to get the clothes clean. Well, you passed that tub, then you went past the windmill, you walked around the woodpile, you ducked under the mulberry tree, then you made a right turn around the garden, then headed due north to the objective. When Grandfather placed the privy, he had no empathy for the patrons who had to walk, or run as the case may be, over that time-consuming path. He chose the proper location, and that was that. His philosophy for location branded our privy as totally unconventional, in that it was placed over a large irrigation ditch flowing with water most of the time. And of course, under these circumstances, for me at least, it was a pleasant place to retire for solitude. It was a place to read undisturbed, a place to observe a sparrow carry grass and string to make a nest in the mulberry tree, a place to watch Grandfather cultivate the cornfield, and a place to watch the squeaky old wheel turn round and round on the windmill. It was a place to listen to the drip, drip, drip of the water in the little tank that Grandfather kept for his sheep. And it was here that I followed slowly moving clouds and watched them form massive, lifelike objects in the sky. I used to like to pick out ships, or a bear, or a horse, or any object that the clouds seemed to make. You know, I was never weary in that peaceful spot. My little dog Bully waited patiently as he sprawled out on his belly with his hind legs stretched out and his nose resting on his front paws. He looked at me with that shaggy hair and seemed to say, "When are you going to move from there and get on with the business of living?" Besides enjoying a view of the world from that vantage point, I had a major, big reason for staying there. the hopes that the dishes would be washed before I went back to the house. But seldom did that work. Usually the grandmother had them waiting for me, and I couldn't make that plan work very well. You know, I often wonder whatever became of that old privy. It served us for many, many years. And the only indignity it suffered was when those boys tipped it over on Halloween night. I'm sure that poor old privy felt chagrin as we were lifting it up the next morning, but it went on with its duty, and it was a good old faithful servant as long as I remember. Well, you know, our childhood memories go back to such things as that old horse you used to have. You used to have an old white horse that I felt so sorry for, because Phil and Carl, and it seemed to me like Elmer, all three of them used to get on that old horse, and I felt so sorry for the thing. I thought, goodness sake, it's bad enough to carry one, but when three get on him, that it just is not right at all. Well, as the years pass, Paul, we have many, many memories, and they're happy memories. Childhood memories are happy memories. So I hope that you don't lose your marbles, or you don't get Alzheimer's disease. Let's hope that we can keep our marbles and remember those old happy times that we used to have, and have lots of joy in our memories. So again, Paul, happy birthday on this 75th year. You know, Paul, talking about losing our marbles and having Alzheimer's disease, I forgot to mention old Brother Bird. You know, he was your neighbor. He lived right on the west side, and he was an old saddle maker, as you remember, but you know, he was also our Sunday school director. You know, when we used to meet in the old, what we called the Opera House, it's the Santana, it's now, but that's where we used to dance, and where we held primary and Sunday school and church, where they used to have those old theaters, you know, those home time theaters. But I'll never forget Revis Bird as he led us in Sunday school. And if we didn't sing right, he would pound that stick on some wooden structure close by so that we would sing out. And the one song that I remember that I'll never forget was when he taught us, "Don't Kill the Little Birds." And you know, after we learned that song, I just could hardly stand it when the boys would go out with their flippers and shoot birds out of a cottonwood tree or something. That made me so angry, because Brother Bird taught me that those little birds were the sweetest things in all the world. I don't know whether you remember the song or not, but I'll read the words to it and see if you can't remember that little song that we learned in Sunday school. Don't kill the little birds that sing on bush and tree all through the summer days, their sweetest melody. Don't shoot the little birds. The earth is God's estate, and he provideth food for small as well as great. Don't kill the little birds. Their plumage wings the air. Their trill at early morn makes music everywhere. What though the cherries fall, half eaten from the stem, and berries disappear in garden, field, and glen? Still, like the widow's cruse, there's always plenty left. How sad a world were this of little birds bereft. Think of the good they do in all the orchards round. No hurtful insects thrive where robins most abound. Don't kill the little birds that sing on bush and tree. All through the summer days, their sweetest melody. In this great world of ours, if we can trust His word, there's food enough for all. Don't kill a single bird. So as long as I can remember this little song that Brother Bert, Uncle Revis we used to call him, taught us, why maybe I'll still think I have my marbles.